Well, this year is Lilo and Stitch's 20th anniversary, and since today is 626, depending on how you write your calendars, that means I think now is a perfect time to talk about the titular character. Well, one of them, it's a and movie, so you know, but Lilo's a human, so forget it. Today we're talking about Stitch from Disney's Lilo and Stitch. Stitch, aka Experiment 626, is a blue creature that vaguely resembles a carnivorous rabbit. In his base form, he has 4 arms, spikes on his back, and a pair of antennae. However, in order to blend in, he is able to retract 2 of his arms, his antennae, and his back spikes. So, yeah. Some of Stitch's powers include super strength, night vision, incredible durability, being described as being both bulletproof and fireproof, and we see him survive a fall from near the atmosphere. In addition, Stitch is also very intelligent, with some of his best showcases being when he tricked guns that tracked his DNA by spitting, and a scene in the TV show where he was quickly able to figure out the exact location of a creature he catapulted away using math. However, Stitch's main drawback is the fact that because of his dense body, he is completely unable to swim, and would sink right to the bottom of any body of water. And since he still needs to breathe, he would eventually drown. Another semi-weakness is that Stitch is described as being able to carry objects 3,000 times his own weight. However, if there was an object that was 3,001 times his own weight, he wouldn't be able to do anything about it. The 3,000 is pretty exact. Stitch made his debut in the 2002 Disney film Lilo and Stitch, which, unusually for a Disney film, was not based on any pre-existing story. Well, I say unusually, but they did this a lot during the 2000s, so, I don't know what point I'm trying to make. Anyway, in this film, Stitch is an alien fugitive who escaped from an intergalactic prison after being declared a crime against nature. He ends up landing on the island of Hawaii, where he befriends a little Hawaiian girl named Lilo, who adopts him as a dog. At first, Stitch only uses her as protection since aliens aren't allowed to be seen around humans, but eventually he warms up to her, and eventually even saves her when they both end up getting kidnapped. When Lilo and Stitch came out, it became the highest-grossing Disney film of the 2000s, and in fact, it and The Princess and the Frog are pretty much the only 2000s movies that Disney acknowledges nowadays, since the others were either box office bombs or were ravaged by critics. Seriously, when was the last time you ever heard Disney mention Brother Bear, or Chicken Little, or Atlantis, or Treasure Planet? Yeah, you never see those movies get acknowledged. But, anyway, Lilo and Stitch is both a critical and financial success, and due to that success, it ended up becoming one of Disney's biggest franchises. The story of Stitch continues in Lilo and Stitch 2, Stitch Has a Glitch. Yes, I know this was the first film released, but it's chronologically the second, so I'm talking about it first. In this film, Stitch, well, read the title. Basically, we find out that while Stitch was being created, he was never fully charged. As such, his molecules are starting to decay away, and it's causing him to have severe glitching, which makes him revert back to his old bad behavior. Unfortunately, since neither Lilo or Stitch are aware of this, they just think that Stitch is relapsing for no reason. At the end of the film, Stitch actually dies, but then he gets resurrected because, Actually, the film doesn't even explain. They straight up admit they have no idea how it happened. So, yeah. You know, this is often considered one of the better direct-to-video sequels, so there's that. But then again, considering that Disney direct-to-video sequels don't have the best reputation, that's probably not saying much. The first follow-up to Lilo and Stitch came out only a year later, in 2003. It was called Stitch! The movie. You gotta shout it since there's an exclamation point. But before I talk about this movie, I really hate that title. Like, what kind of name is Stitch the Movie? Lilo and Stitch was already basically Stitch the Movie. That'd be like if the next Harry Potter film was called Harry Potter the Movie. Like, that doesn't even make sense. We've been following the whole time. Why are you just now randomly declaring that it's his movie? Well, actually, I have the explanation here. You see, the Lilo and Stitch TV show is going to be called Stitch the Series, so its pilot movie was going to be called Stitch the Movie, but then in production they decided to just call it Lilo and Stitch the Series, so now this movie just has a really stupid title. Alright, plot. So, in this movie, it's revealed that Stitch's experiment name, 626, is not just a random number. Rather, he was actually the 626th experiment created by his creator. We find out that all the experiments before Stitch are kept in pod forms that end up reigniting when exposed to water. And although all of them get released at the end, we don't see them until the TV show. In this movie in particular, we're introduced to Experiment 625, later nicknamed Reuben. He has all the same powers as Stitch, but he's incredibly lazy. And the main focus of the movie is Experiment 221, nicknamed Sparky. He has electrical powers and is able to possess anything electronic. At the end of the movie, all the experiments end up raining out of their pods all over Hawaii, and so Lilo and Stitch have to go out and find them and find a place where they truly belong. Thus, leading right into Lilo and Stitch the series. Continuing where Stitch the movie left off, this series is about Lilo and Stitch having to hunt down the other experiments, or Stitch's cousins as they're referred to, and having to rehabilitate them so they can find the one place where they truly belong so they don't get captured and used for evil. This show introduced a whole bunch of experiments, but we never actually see all 626 experiments. Since, that'd be kind of ridiculous, and the show only lasted for 65 episodes, so, if we were to see all of them, that would require, let's see, 65 divided by, no, 626 divided by 65, we would have to see, a lot every episode. If you want to do the math, be my guest. Anyway, some of the more notable experiments to appear in this series include Experiment 513, Richter, an ankylosaur-like experiment designed to create massive earthquakes capable of shattering planets. His one true place is making milkshakes. Experiment 606, Holio, a creature able to create black holes. His one true place is to be a garbage disposal. Experiment 520, Cannonball, a creature designed to create massive tsunamis to wipe out cities. He ends up just making regular waves that surfers can surf on. Experiment 7, Gigi, who I'm only mentioning because it's literally a dog. Experiments 501 and 502, Yin and Yang, one shoots water, one shoots fire. They end up working together to make new islands. Experiment 601, Kicks, an alien that loves picking fights, who ends up becoming a fitness instructor on a videotape. Experiment 619, Splody Head, a creature that shoots hot balls of plasma out of its nose. His, one place is lighting torches. Oh yeah, he's also notable for the fact that he actually makes a cameo in Big Hero 6 as an image on a pillow. So, that's interesting. There's 627, who was never actually gotten a nickname. He has all the same powers as Stitch, but everything he does is twice as good as him. Basically, after Stitch started becoming a spoiled brat, 627 was created as a way to teach Stitch some humility. Unfortunately, he escaped and started working with the bad guys, causing several experiments to end up in the wrong hands. Eventually, 627 is defeated after it was discovered that since he has all of Stitch's abilities twofold, that also means that he has an incredibly low sense of humor and laughs at pretty much anything remotely funny. So, he ends up having a laugh attack, and he ends up getting shoved inside a dehydrator, which ends up reverting him back to a pod. Yeah. Oh yeah, at the end of the episode, we also see a pod labeled 628, but it's been confirmed that was just a joke that was never meant to be followed up on. So, yeah. There's Experiment 523, Slushy, an experiment with cryokinetic abilities, who ends up making snow cones. Then we've got probably the most famous of the cousins, Angel, Experiment 624. Her power is that anyone who hears her song becomes evil, with the exception of Stitch and Reuben due to being made after her. At first, she's a sleeper agent for the bad guys trying to revert all the experiments back to evil, but then she actually falls in love with Stitch for real, and it turns out that if she sings her song backwards, her powers get reversed. But unfortunately, she ends up getting kidnapped anyway, so it was all for nothing. There's Ace, Experiment 262, who was considered a failure due to the fact that he is completely unable to do anything evil, and instead will always help out people in whatever way he can. He debuted in a clip show episode, which as we all know are the highest entertainment of television. There's Whoops, Experiment 600, who's pretty much a prototype Stitch. And when I say that, I mean it. He is incredibly lowly, intelligent, and incredibly clumsy. But eventually, it's found out that since he's good at knocking things over, he ends up joining a bowling team. And finally, we have 120 Snafu, a creature designed to ruin plans. He ends up trying to sabotage Lilo and Stitch's plan to save the captured experiments, only to end up getting himself captured. Fortunately, the duo managed to free all the captured experiments and managed to find all the previously kidnapped experiments' new homes. We never find out what Snafu does, though. In 2006, in order to cap off the TV show, we were given Leroy and Stitch, the fourth movie in the franchise. This was not only a finale to the TV show, but as I'll explain later, it's also kind of a finale to the concept of Lilo and Stitch. I'll get into more detail later. In the film, thanks to capturing and rehabilitating all the experiments, Stitch is given an opportunity to be the captain of the intergalactic police officers. But that would require leaving Lilo behind, which upsets her. But unfortunately for the both of them at the same time, a new experiment is also being made. Leroy, Experiment 629, an evil clone of Stitch, much like 627, except, he's Evil Stitch. Quick side note though, for the longest time, 629 wasn't his official title. That was just kind of something people concluded since, as I mentioned before, we already had a 627 and 628, so it just made sense. But some promotional material called him 628, even though that technically already exists. But eventually there was some officially licensed media that called him 629, which seemingly confirmed it after all. But then again, it's not that hard to reach if you can count. Anyway, Leroy ends up replacing Stitch, clones himself, and captures all the other experiments to bring them to a stadium so they can be vilified. However, one Avengers Endgame-style fight breaks out between the cousins and the Leroy clone, where despite the numerous powers, the Leroys end up getting the upper hand, until eventually, it turns out that during Leroy's creation, he was given a failsafe that causes him to glitch out if he hears the song Aloha Oi. So after a concert, the Lilos are left inert, and Lilo and Stitch get their happy ending after all. And thus closing the journey of Lilo and Stitch. Lilo and Stitch has spawned plenty of video games based on its movies, as well as appearances of its characters in crossover games. One of the most notable games is Disney's Stitch, Experiment 626 for the PlayStation 2. One of the reasons this game is notable is because it marks the first time we ever saw another experiment besides Stitch. In this case, we're introduced to Experiment 621, who is never actually nicknamed in the game since this takes place before Lilo, but according to the official list, his name is possibly Chop Suey. I say possibly because this is all under the assumption that the 621 on the list is the same one as in the video game, which is debatably canon since time material tends to not really be canon most of the time, but most fans just call him that because it's convenient. Anyway, he's a prototype of Stitch who grows jealous of him and eventually ends up mutating to try to stop him. Like most popular Disney franchises, Lilo and Stitch has had representation in the Kingdom Hearts games. In Kingdom Hearts 2, Stitch hangs out in the area known as Hollow Bastion, which is kind of the game's hub world, sorta. That's what I'm calling it anyway. Anyway, Stitch doesn't really do much in the plot, he just kind of appears, and you're supposed to go, "Whoa, I know who that is!" Kind of like most of the Final Fantasy characters in this game. What? Who said that? I didn't say anything. What are you talking about? Anyway, Stitch is also a summonable ally who helps you in fights. Later, in the prequel game Birth by Sleep, we end up going to Stitch's homeworld, Deep Space, which takes place during the film's prologue. In this version, Stitch kinda gets rehabilitated before escaping prison. So, there's that. This game is also notable for the fact that it features Sparky as a boss fight, making him the very first character who appeared in a follow-up installment to appear in Kingdom Hearts. Overall, I'd say Stitch's appearance in this game was pretty good, although considering that the entire world seems to be referring to a spaceship just raises the question as to if the worlds in Kingdom Hearts are supposed to be like planets or pocket dimensions, which is a debate that can be had all day long, but we'll probably never get the answer. But hey, I love the music of this world. Now, you might have noticed that in the Kingdom Hearts summaries, I never mentioned that Lilo is in the game. I'll get back to that a little later. In 2008, we were given the anime Stitch! Well, what do you know, Stitch the movie got validated. Anyway, in this series, Stitch ends up on a fictional island off the coast of Japan where he ends up befriending a different girl named Yuna. How did Stitch get here, you might be asking? Well, at first, this series was marketed as a sorta AU. Basically, what if Stitch landed near Japan instead of in Hawaii? However, in the English dub, and later confirmed by an appearance in an episode, Stitch ended up leaving Lilo after she grew up and he felt like he was a burden. Disney, what is it with you and splitting up iconic duos? Really? Why do you keep doing this? Are we now gonna get a Monsters Inc. 2 where Mike and Sully split up? I don't think I can handle that! Anyway, now the canonicity of this series is pretty debatable. Some people say it's been officially declared non-canon, even though that statement's never been made. But there are some plot points that would make this pretty unlikely to be canon, such as the fact that Reuben is still a bad guy, or the fact that some of the experiments are seen in their pods again, despite them being all rehabilitated by the time of Leroy and Stitch. So in my opinion, I don't think the series is canon. In 2017, we got a Chinese animated series called Stitch and I. This time, Stitch befriends a girl named I. This one is both a sequel to the movies, but a prequel to the Stitch anime. This show did not last very long. It only had 13 episodes, and they all aired in less than a month. Like most popular Disney franchises, Lilo and Stitch has had a healthy presence in the park, with the most famous, well, infamous appearance in the parks being Stitch's Great Escape, which was an overlay of the cult classic attraction Alien Extraterrestrial Encounter. In this show, Stitch is brought to Disneyland where he starts messing with guests before escaping into the park. This show got very bad reviews, mostly from fans of Alien Encounters, with another complaint being that this ride had a very hard time appealing to anyone. It was considered too scary for kids, but it was considered too stupid and gross for older people. So as such, eventually the ride shut down. And oh yeah, you can't forget the merchandise. Stitch has had plenty of merchandise. Debatably almost as much as Mickey Mouse, which is impressive, to say the least. As stated earlier, Lilo and Stitch was the most popular Disney film of the 2000s, and as such, Stitch is still remembered today as one of the Disney greats, alongside Mickey Mouse and, Snow Woman, whatever her name was. But, in this section, I kinda want to talk about something that's, going on at the franchise. As I've been hinting throughout this video, there seems to have been an effort by Disney in recent years to more or less get Lilo out of the franchise. She almost never appears in crossover games, it's always Stitch. Like in Kingdom Hearts, for example, I already mentioned earlier that Stitch is by himself. Plus, in that series, it's left incredibly vague as to if Lilo even exists in that series. So there's that. And recently, merchandise has started to stop being branded Lilo and Stitch and is just branded Stitch. Not to mention, there were the two aforementioned TV shows which replaced Lilo with different girls. So what I'm saying is, it genuinely feels like they're trying to get Lilo out of the franchise. Which is sad, because it's Lilo and Stitch. It's not just Stitch, it's Lilo and Stitch. She was Stitch's entire character growth motivation, and yet recently, Disney's like, no, she doesn't exist anymore. One of the main theories I heard about this is that she's not very popular outside of America, and because of that, most international productions tend to downplay or get rid of her. Which is upsetting, because these two are a duo, and yet it genuinely feels like one of them is trying to be erased. I mean, imagine if they stopped advertising Woody and Toy Story material and only focused on Buzz for the rest of time. Or if they just completely got rid of Marlin and only advertised Dory and Finding Nemo merchandise. Or something like that. But then again, there's the live-action remake coming. Because of course there is. Well, that's all for this episode of Monsters of the Mind. Happy 20th anniversary, Lilo and Stitch. And always remember, everyone, Ohana means family, and family means nobody gets left behind. Unless you're not profitable overseas, in which case, we're leaving you behind. Bye!